Welcome to this Wexted podcast, Spotlight on Safe Harbour. I'm joined by two experts in the area, Andrew McCabe, my partner, and the great Michael Catchpoole from Corrs. Welcome, gentlemen. So it's 7 years in, the 7-year itch. Is it working? Did it begin well? Is it achieving what the ambition of the law was, Michael?
In practice, it's worked really well to extend the time in which directors have to make decisions about the future of companies in financial distress. And it's probably ended a culture of precipitous insolvency appointments. So to the extent to which it was envisaged that companies would be able to try and execute transactions outside of a formal process, I think it has been successful, but there's obviously more that can be done.
Yeah, look, I think some directors were a bit nervous at first, but once they got into the process, they saw the benefits. And the key benefit and takeaway, most of the directors, I feel, is time. It just gives them that extra breathing space to consider their options. Some directors want to run for the door and quit before it gets too messy. Others dig in for the fight, and that breathing space that Safe Harbour gives them provides opportunity to explore all the options available to them to restructure the business and recapitalise and get it going again.
Yeah. Let's talk about how it begins then. Let's talk about commencement, because unlike voluntary administration or any other form of insolvency, there's a soft beginning for Safe Harbour. Yeah,
usually it's either the CFO or one of the board members might be nervous about solvency and insolvency going forward. They then bring us in to say, look, at what point is the perfect point to appoint. They've left a capital raise too late, or there's uncertainty to raise the money, or there's some remediation issues on mining sites. There's a few things there that just keep coming up. Usually it's cash.
Yeah, I think we see a persistent pattern as well around refinancing pressure.
Yeah.
So in the context of covenant breaches or waivers, it often part of the conversation becomes, well, what's the cash flow looking like? How's this refinancing need going to be met? Whereas there is downside in holding it back too far. So we're encouraging people to try and appoint Safe Harbour advisors and go into a Safe Harbour plan at the first sign of financial difficulty, which is often, in reality, a covenant breach.
Directors will often say to us, why are we doing this? Is it necessary? Insolvent trading's interesting. What's in this for us? And so benefits and drawbacks.
One of the key things that's happening in a company which is got a cash flow problem or it has a covenant problem is that it's going to have to transact in the immediate future, and it's probably going to transact in circumstances which are not ideal. And one of the good things about Safe Harbour is it brings another independent advisor into the deck to advise on commercial issues, and it starts to actually help in filling out the director's duties piece of the puzzle. Because it's not just a case of avoiding insolvent trading. There is a duty to take proper information and act with care. I like it for that reason. I like it because it avoids the look back, but I also like it because it starts to help people with their decision making and put a layer of advice and professionalism around what is often quite a time-sensitive transaction.
The course of action's in the board's head. They know the industry better than any advisor coming in. It's in their head, and we're helping them document it, because that's a key part of it, is to document it and then also add on extra courses of action.
Do we think that there's a vibe that's important in Safe Harbour? So it's more than insolvent trading. It's more than defeating insolvent trading. You're just operating in a far more redemptive environment. People feel more confident, feel better.
Yeah, I think it gives a layer of confidence to the directors and management that there's professional advice there. So that's one of the things that kind of goes to that environment of confidence, is that there is a facing up to it, but also there are some things that you can practically do from long experience of trading companies which are working capital constrained. And I think maybe the final piece is that having someone in there and having a documented course of action keeps everyone focused on the prize, which is executing a transaction that resolves the situation as an alternative to an administration or a liquidation or receivership.
So we have a course of action, it's written down, we know what it is, but turning that into linking the cash flow to the plan and saying the plan will objectively deliver you this. We'll talk about the counterfactual in a moment. is one of the real benefits, because often people have it in their head, but they haven't turned it into numbers, Macca.
That it sharpens the focus of the directors back to the numbers, which, that cash flow and building out that cash flow for the next 12 months, you can see the dips, you can see what they need to do. If they need to cut costs or raise capital, whatever it might be, they can really focus in on those key issues.
You mentioned to me earlier this concept of runway versus highway. Do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah. So if you're on a highway to nowhere, that's not really an appropriate journey to go on, because it doesn't have that ability to meet the test of a better outcome. And sometimes Safe Harbour is a runway in the sense that it can be a relatively short and accelerative process. But if at a certain point on the runway, the plane's not going to take off, you need to pump the brakes, just like you can be going down the highway. And as long as there's a town at the end of the road, that's a fine outcome. But you have to be aware that at certain points in time, you have to pull off the highway, or you have to stop taking off from the runway, because you're not going to make it.
Do you think people just get into a system where we're in Safe Harbour and that's okay?
Really, it comes down to the director's reasonable expectation. Is that plan realistic? Do they think they can achieve those goals? Sometimes, Joe, we come in and look at it and say, I don't think you'll be able to convert 1,000 note holders and get 100% conversion into equity to get what you need to do. What would be the outcome here? What would happen to contracts? What would happen to claims? What would happen to employees and redundancies? And where would that creditor stack lie? And we compare the two for each key class of creditors, secureds, unsecureds, employees, estimate the return. Each would get cents in the dollar timing in the plan versus in the external administration.
Which, Catchy, takes you to objectivity, independence, qualifications, appropriately qualified entity or entities.
I think that really there are some pitfalls in having people who are not financially numerate, financial and numerate conducting Safe Harbour roles. And one of those key pitfalls is that you're really not well placed to make an objective assessment about the better outcome test. And in coming to that issue about work product and showing it to someone, there's a question about whose privilege it is. If the law firm, for instance, is an appropriately qualified advisor.
You're talking about the law firm that's advising the company.
Advising the company. So is it the company's privilege?
Yes.
And if it's the company's privilege, then what's the arrangement in relation to how that privilege is shared? And then there's probably a question about whether you can properly represent the interests of the directors and the company, because the interests of the company may be divergent from the interests of the directors.
Indeed.
So whose engagement is it? There is, a scenario where if a safe harbour defence isn't properly established, that it seems to be a reasonably straightforward cause of action back to the appropriately qualified entity for the director. So there's the potential that whoever's acting as the appropriately qualified entity could, in certain circumstances, find itself as both a material witness in the case,
Indeed,
giving evidence about why they formed the view that the course of action was reasonably appropriate, and secondly, find themselves in a position where potentially, depending on the outcome of that case, or depending on the way in which that case is prosecuted, the directors might be looking to them in the event that they can't establish the safe harbour defence. But I think it's better for everyone in some respects that you have an independent safe harbour, appropriately qualified entity who is, appropriately managing their relationship with the company and the directors.
But we if we look at this redemptively, impact on boards. Macca, what are you seeing with the boards you work with?
We've seen other board members actually come into the process during the safe harbour. So they can see the benefits it provides. They can see the rigour, the governance. We're independent advisors along with the lawyers. We give them extra pointers to improve their minutes and improve their board pack, so that's just a more rigorous process and improves their governance along the way.
So I'm a director of a mid-sized company, say. What are the 3 or 4 things we think we would say to a group of directors is a checklist?
That 12-month cash flow, it shows you the runway, shows you what you need to do. You can document the course of action and the plan along that way, which might be an equity raise, might be cutting costs, might be selling a business unit. Could be a number of things that they're doing to improve, as Michael mentioned, getting waivers on covenant breaches, giving yourself some time. So that cash flow is the number one.
So one of the things which I think would be good to see would be, erring towards starting early and erring towards starting while there's still capital available to the business to try and restructure. So I think Safe Harbour as sort of a palliative step is not the way to go. It's a proactive step, because if it's too far gone by the time it starts, it's very hard to turn things around. So if, I looked at it and said, has it been successful? Yes, because there's been a lot of companies that have been able to transact that would formerly have been forced to go into an insolvency process. Insolvent trading is a little bit anachronistic. It's the last part of sort of debtor's prison that still exists in our legal system. And it's really prevented it from strangling otherwise viable businesses and causing, the loss of employment and loss of enterprise value.
Well, there you have it. Catchy and Macca have signed off on Safe Harbour. They think it's fit for purpose.